This has to be the single dumbest thing I've ever done. It's late July, and I had a bit of a problem. To put it frankly, I was bored. Now don't get me wrong, I love doing nothing just as much as the next guy, but after 2.5 months of summer, even that was starting to wear thin. I'd either already finished or abandoned most of my summer plans, so there wasn't really all that much to do. In my state of boredom, I began looking for a new video idea. Ideally something a bit larger than normal that would help me take advantage of all this free time. Looking back, I could have done several things. A new lore video, that video on the Kara that I said I was going to do but still haven't done yet, or that 100 Days and Below Zero video that I know some of y'all have been waiting for. All of these would have been enjoyable, entertaining, or at least mildly interesting. But no, I came up with a different idea. One that would cost me a great deal of my time, sanity, and whatever semblance remained of that thing I like to call an upload schedule. And so began my quest to build the longest base in Subnautica history. In order to actually build the longest base, I first had to figure out the record I was going to be beating. To do that, we have to go back a little ways. The idea of a super long Subnautica base didn't see much attention in the game's early days. That's not to say people weren't building big bases, they certainly were, but for the most part, sheer length wasn't the main priority. IGP did build a pretty sizable void base, but for a while that was pretty much it. Even after the game left early access, things stayed pretty quiet for the next 2.5 years. But all of that would change in August of 2020. The first main attempt at a really long base was uploaded by the YouTuber Pab on August 17th. The base took around 5 hours to build, but once it was finished, it stretched all the way from the life pod to the primary containment facility. This base was in a league of its own, and it would stand virtually uncontested for over 2 years. Now, the reason nothing on this scale had ever been built before was mostly due to base lag. What is base lag, you might be asking? Well, let me explain. Each Subnautica base is built on its own grid. It's what allows you to connect your base pieces, and it also lets the game keep track of things like power and hull integrity. Every time you build a new base piece within this grid, even if the pieces aren't directly connected, the game has to run some calculations to incorporate the new section. In a normal playthrough, your base is small enough that you aren't likely to notice this, but if you keep adding more and more sections, it'll cause the game to start freezing for longer and longer each time, drastically slowing your progress. The way Pab got around this problem was by splitting the base into 3 sections. Because each of these sections were on different grids, they were technically different bases, meaning the game didn't have to do as large of calculations every time a new piece was added, reducing the base lag as a result. Fast forward to December of 2022, and the Subnautica devs are about to release something big. Officially known as the Living Large update, but often called Subnautica 2.0, it's the biggest single update since the game's full release. Among its contents include an Unstuck button, the very popular Large Room, but perhaps most importantly, improvements to the game's code that drastically reduced base lag. Where Pab once struggled to go 1,200 meters, you can now build 2, 4, or even 6 kilometers without breaking a sweat. The first person to take advantage of this was Whalelol, who uploaded a video titled Longest Base in Subnautica History. The base was similar to Pab's, but started on the Aurora and only went down to the inactive lava zone. But Whalelol wasn't done. Just 2 days later, on January 9th of 2023, he would upload a video of a much larger base, stretching from the surface to a height of over 8,000 meters. These 2 videos, along with the one by Pab, ended up doing really well, and it wasn't long before some other creators began to take notice. With 5 extremely long bases under his belt, few people know quite as much about building as the last Bacon. Starting with a record-setting base connecting up every biome, Bacon would go on to build 2 8-kilometer bases, and a sequel to his first build in Below Zero. He would eventually lose the record on March 8th to a 16-kilometer base built by Brad as Brad, but Bacon would come back to tie the record with a similar base of his own. Most recently, Subnautica World quietly broke the tie with a base that was similar to Bacon and Brad's, but it had a large hallway connecting up the main sections. This brought the total length of the base up to around 18 kilometers, and as far as I know, that's where the record currently stands. That means any base I build is going to have to be a bit more than 18 kilometers to take the record. Unfortunately, that number complicates things. You might have noticed that a lot of these bases are either 8 or 16 kilometers long, and there's a good reason for that. This is Subnautica's map. It's 3.5 by 3.5 kilometers, extends to a depth of just over 1,600 meters, and is where the player will spend around 99.9% of their time. That other 0.1% accounts for the trip that most players make to the ecological dead zone, better known as the Void. Although most will never go anywhere near this far, the Void actually extends out over 6 kilometers, making the total size of the map way bigger than you might have realized. This is why a lot of these bases are the lengths they are. 8 kilometers is the distance from the center to the top, bottom, or edge of the world, and doubling that gets you from the bottom of the Void to the top of the sky. But since my base needs to be at least 18 kilometers, even going from one end of the world to the other won't quite be enough. I thought of taking a similar approach to Subnautica World, but I figured that just copying their design wouldn't be very original. No, if I was going to break the record, I needed to do something completely different. One option I thought about was building a diagonal base from one corner of the world to the other. If it was aligned properly, this would allow the base to reach over 23 kilometers. But then I had a different idea. Instead of building the base as a straight line, what if the base were a large square surrounding the outer edge of the map? Now, I shouldn't have to tell you just how bad of an idea this was. Assuming I could actually build the dang thing, it would be a whopping 64 kilometers long. That's almost 4 times the size of these other bases that already cause their builders a fair bit of hassle. I wasn't even sure if a base of this size would load, much less how I was going to get it out that far. By all accounts, it was a stupid idea, but it was also one that I just couldn't get out of my head. So after mulling it over for a few days, I decided to just open up Subnautica and see what I could do. My very first step was to make not 1 new world, but 3. Assuming I ever actually got that far, I knew a 64-kilometer base would cause quite a bit of lag, and I wanted to see if there was any way I could reduce it. In some of the other videos I watched, I saw comments suggesting to either build the base above water, or split the base into smaller sections and connect them later to reduce lag. I knew from experience that large rooms could lag the game pretty quickly, so I built an 8x8 box of them in each new world, one on the surface, one that was split into 2 sections, alongside a normal base for comparison. I then timed how long it took to build the 64th room, and seeing that it was more or less identical, just decided to build the base around 300 meters. I then created the actual world I planned to use, made my way out to the Grand Reef, and began the painstaking process of getting everything to face as close to north as possible. Because the base was going to be running parallel to the edge of the world for so long, if the angle was too far off, the base could actually run into the edge of the world, and the only way to fix that would be to deconstruct and reconstruct the entire thing, something I really didn't want to have to do. It's also why the base is being built at 8,000 meters and not the full 8,192. Whereas the latter would have to be perfectly aligned, across a 16-kilometer span, the former gives me a generous 0.7 degrees of wiggle room. Since I couldn't actually start the base in the Void, I began to leapfrog my way out there by constructing and deconstructing moon pools. This worked really well, for about 3 kilometers. You know how I said large rooms cause lots of base lag? Well, apparently so do moon pools. And for some reason, even though I was deconstructing the moon pools about 2 seconds after placing them, the lag was already getting really bad. I did keep going, and I managed to get out to 8,000 meters, but as soon as I started building the actual base, it became clear this wasn't going to work. Each new component was freezing the game for multiple seconds, and there was no way the game or my sanity were going to be able to put up with 64 kilometers of this. So I went back to the drawing board. Right away, I realized moon pools were probably causing most of my problems. So for the second attempt, I decided to swap the moon pools for glass compartments. I also realized that building the whole 64-kilometer base on one grid system probably wasn't going to work. And for that, I had two possible solutions. I could kidnap a dev, lock them in my basement, and force them to spend hours re-optimizing the code, or I could just split the base into 4 16-kilometer sections that would technically be different bases, but make the whole build a lot more manageable. Ultimately, my unwillingness to get stuck in San Francisco traffic led me to pick the second option, so that would be my plan going forward. I then repeated the alignment process, got to building, and let me tell you, removing those moon pools made a world of difference. I reached 8,000 meters in what felt like no time at all, and with most of the base lag gone, I made a left turn and began heading towards what would eventually be the southeast corner of the base. Things started out well, and I was actually making good progress, but about 7 kilometers in, the base lag started to get pretty bad. I decided to deconstruct the tunnel leading out to the base to see if that would do anything. It helped a little, and I was actually able to reach the southeast corner, but I still had to build another 7 kilometers in the other direction just to finish the first side. So for the second time, I was forced to rethink my strategy. I knew a big thing contributing to all that base lag was the roughly 6-kilometer tunnel I had to build to connect the base to the actual map. That's a lot of unnecessary base pieces just sitting there causing lag, and while deconstructing the tunnel afterwards did help, for whatever reason there was still some residual lag. Now, the most obvious solution would be to just start building at the actual location, but that wasn't possible. Even in creative mode, bases still need some kind of terrain to build off of, something the Void completely lacks. I tested other large objects, the Neptune launch pad, the Cyclops, even dead Leviathans, but nothing worked. I decided to look at a couple of mods and see if they could help me. At first, this habitat platform mod seemed to be exactly what I was looking for. A floating base platform, albeit confined to the surface, that I could just spawn in wherever I wanted. Unfortunately, the mod only works before the Living Large update, which I needed for the base optimizations, and when I tried to uninstall the mod so I could re-update, the platform and anything I built on top of it just vanished. Another mod that seemed to hold some promise was the Terraformer, but in order to actually make new terrain, it still needs something to actually build off of, so that was a no-go as well. I even went to the wiki and looked through all the console commands, coming up empty-handed yet again. It was funny then that after all my failed ideas, the solution came from a very simple realization. If 4 16-kilometer sections were causing too much lag, I could always just split the base into 8 8-kilometer sections. Sure, it wasn't the most elegant solution, but who was I to complain? I had a plan, and it was time to get to work. After basically repeating what I did to build the first part, the southern fourth of the base was done. Obviously, the two halves couldn't be fully connected since they were technically different bases, but I think I did a pretty good job of lining everything up. And in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small gap anyway. With that done, I traveled out to the dunes, and since I was already going to be aligning the third section, I decided to just go ahead and do it for the fourth one as well. I then began work on the southern half of the western side, and got about 6 kilometers in before taking a break to work on another video. A couple of weeks later, I finished the section and got to connect up one of the corners. This was the first point where it really started to feel like the base was coming together, and it motivated me to keep working. I posted a little sneak peek of the base. Probably not the best idea when the thing wasn't even halfway done, but I was excited. I headed back to the dunes and began work on the fourth section. As I started building though, I couldn't help but feel like the game was a bit more sluggish than usual. I went back to the safe shallows to check, and sure enough, I was getting constant frame dips where I could normally keep 60 FPS. I guess this was to be expected, but it wasn't even the worst problem. You know how I said that if you started a base on a new grid it wouldn't have any base lag? Well, the game was running so poorly that even this brand new base would have a slight amount of lag anytime I built something. Nevertheless, I kept going, and after a few more hours, the 4th section was done, marking my arrival at the base's halfway point without too much difficulty. The same, however, could not be said about section number 5. Right from the get-go, I could tell something was different. While the increase in base lag from sections 3 to 4 was noticeable, the jump from 4 to 5 was severe. In the spirit of a moron who thought this whole thing was a good idea in the first place, I initially ignored the problem. But I was forced back to reality when, around 2,000 meters into the main tunnel, the game crashed. I lost around 45 minutes of work from that, and my first instinct was to just save more often, but after finally making some new progress, I was forced to take a step back. Construction was moving at a snail's pace. There was no way I was going to be able to finish this section, much less the other 24 kilometers, not with the game already on the verge of crashing. No, if I wanted any hope of finishing this base, I was going to need more than just brute force in a bunch of separate sections. I needed a way to reduce the base lag. Quite frustratingly, I still had a way that I thought would work. The only things causing unnecessary lag were those stupid tubes I had to build and deconstruct just to connect the base to solid ground. If I could just figure out a way to start the bases in the void, I was pretty sure the last 2 sides would be relatively straightforward. But I had already looked into this and came up empty-handed at every turn. It was then that I realized the project was dead. All that time I had spent planning and building, it had all gone to waste. I was going to have to pivot to a different idea or scrap the concept altogether. But it was getting late and that was a task for tomorrow, so I shut off my computer and went to bed. It's interesting how the mind begins to wander as one falls asleep. A billion random thoughts all swirled into one giant sleepy concoction. As nice as it is, it's not usually a good time for serious thoughts. But that night was different. As I laid there in the darkness, searching for something to solve my problem, a single thought suddenly ran through my mind. Wait a minute. Didn't the last Bacon already do a video on this? I had to know for sure, so I dug around on his channel for a little bit, and at the 5-minute 56-second mark of a seemingly unremarkable video from 3 years ago, I found this.
Luckily, as many of you guys have advised me to, I've tried the Build Tweaks mod and it works perfectly. So with these 2 mods, even though you're not able to build here by default, you can simply disable all the restrictions with the press of a button.
That certainly looked promising. So in theory, all I'd have to do is go to the description and click on the link to Building Tweaks and... Why can't it ever be easy? Just for once, I want it to be easy! So it seems like, for whatever reason, the Building Tweaks mod got deleted, which would have been bad, but when I decided to look up the mod, I found this. I had no idea if this was even the same mod, but it was also called Building Tweaks, and to pass me, that was close enough. I downloaded the mod, and wouldn't you know, it did exactly what I've been looking for this whole time. Man, I really wish I'd have known about this thing 15 hours ago. Even better, the base pieces stuck around even after uninstalling the mod, meaning I could just go in, build all the starting base pieces, and uninstall the mod if it caused any issues. So, at long last, I had my solution. The only question now is how to go about continuing the project, because there was still the issue of that unfinished 5th section. With all the base lag, I knew finishing or destroying it would take ages, and I didn't want to split the section in half with yet another new base. Fortunately, I had one more option. I'd initially been worried that the save file might get corrupted, so as the base got bigger, I'd actually made a couple of backups. They were only as recent as the 3rd section, but I still thought it'd be quicker to just rebuild the 4th section than destroy the 5th one, so that's what I went with. I reinstalled the mod, imported the backup world, thought I was going to have to restart the whole operation when the game froze for about 20 minutes, but eventually I was in. Using one of the other bases as a reference, I teleported to the other edges of the world and aligned all the new base pieces. After that, I removed the mod and was pretty much ready to go. My first task was to reconstruct the fourth section of the base, and I've gotta say it went about as well as I could have hoped. Not only was I saving time I would have had to spend constructing and deconstructing that huge connecting tunnel, but I'd gotten rid of so much base lag that it felt like the build was flying by. Whereas a single section might have taken me 3 hours before, I was able to redo the whole fourth section in just 40 minutes. I then moved on to the fifth section. This time, there were no crashes, no insane lag, and just 45 minutes later I'd fully connected up the northwest corner. The sixth section was next, and just like the others, it just felt so easy. Moving on to the last remaining side, I built out the seventh section, connecting up the northeast corner and bringing the total length of the base to 56 kilometers. But the base wasn't done quite yet. Between me and the finish line that seemed impossibly far away just a few weeks ago was now a distance of just 8,000 meters. The base lag was getting worse, but after everything I'd been through, I wasn't about to let that stop me. It was time to put the final nail in this project. It was time to complete the longest base in Subnautica history. After over 20 hours of experimentation, preparation, and of course, mindlessly hitting right-click, it was done. With a final length of 64 kilometers or just under 700,000 Big Macs, I think it's safe to say this is easily the longest Subnautica base ever built. In-game, it's actually a bit difficult to get a sense of just how big this thing is. It surrounds an area that's twice as large as the 5 smallest countries combined, and if it were all put in one straight line, it would be about as long as the thinnest part of Chile. Finally, something and I'm sure a lot of you want to know is how long it would take to run a full lap around this thing. So I put the game at 10 times speed and started booking it, but while I'm doing that, I just want to let you know that only around 5% of my viewers are actually subscribed. Videos like this take a lot of time and effort to make, so if you want to see more of my deranged antics, consider doing us both a favor and hitting that funny red button. Eventually, I made it back to my starting point in around 18 minutes. This means at normal speed, it would take you roughly 3 hours of non-stop sprinting just around the base once. And if that isn't varying your exercise routine for uniform muscle development, then I don't know what is. Anyways, that's pretty much everything I had planned for this base. But if there is something else you want to see, please feel free to let me know. In the meantime, enjoy the start of fall, or spring if you happen to live in that other half of the world, and I hope to see you all again very soon.